even a worm will turn. They are first heard long before they are seen. The peal of rusting bells rolls across the trenches like funeral thunder, accompanied by the broken choir song of 1,000 ragged throats singing hymns through blood, phlegm, and shattered teeth. Their arrival is announced by the grinding cadence of pilgrimage, wheels dragging through the mire, and by the ceaseless muttering of prayers carried upon smoke-thick winds. They are smelled before they crest the parapets, the iron tang of blood mingled with incense, the bitter sting of mere-soaked bandages, and the sour rot of flesh preserved beneath layers of sacred oil. Then they finally emerge. Sickly bodies wrapped in yellowing cloth stagger through shellfire with impossible fervour, icons and relics clattering from their frames as they charge. Yet it is only when their swollen, arthritic hands close around the throat of a screaming heretic that their true nature is understood. They are agony made holy. They are the union of church and trench. They are lepers, pilgrims, penitents, and martyrs. They are the vast and terrible procession of the sacred affliction, the bloodied knuckles of Christendom, bodies and souls reforged over centuries in the furnace of the Great War. And in this video, we shall delve into their story. So please like and subscribe, and join me on this journey through the world of Trench Crusade. Though records of wandering refugee congregations, blessed as sacred processions by the papal decree, date as far back as the wars of Triclavianism in the 13th century, the first true procession of the sacred affliction was born amidst the horror of the corpse wars. It was during this age of plague and revelation that the prophet Solon first gathered the doomed and forgotten beneath his banner. When Beelzebub, Prince of Decay, unleashed the Black Grail upon Europa, entire kingdoms drowned beneath pestilence. Villages collapsed into carnal pits, roads became clogged with corpses, and the desperate sick wandered aimlessly between fortified settlements whose gates remained shut against them. Among these forsaken masses travelled Solon and his followers, a caravan of lepers and plague-ridden faithful whose bodies had become grotesque monuments to suffering, their flesh slewed from their bones in strips, their fingers blackened and split, their lungs rattled like cracked censers, yet they endured. Town after town denied them entry. Priests who preached mercy barred chapel doors in terror of infection. Lords ordered soldiers to drive the diseased away with spear and torch. To the healthy, the procession appeared less like human beings and more like death itself, stumbling across the roads of Christendom. Enraged by the cowardice and selfishness of their fellow Christians, Solon declared that if the world would not witness the suffering of God's abandoned children, then it would witness their martyrdom instead. Near one such settlement, Solon and his closest companions sealed themselves within an ancient tomb. Before the stone doors were shut, the prophet commanded his followers to return after 7 days, exhume their remains, and parade the corpses through the city gates, so that all might see the price of apathy and fear. The faithful expected only death. Instead, on the 7th day, the stone doors groaned open from within, and Solon emerged alive. Not merely alive, but transformed. The prophet walked from the darkness, hale and unbowed, his ruined flesh restored with terrible vitality. Those sealed beside him followed soon after, their sores hardened into scarred sigils, their crippled limbs strengthened, with newfound endurance. Falling to their knees in ecstatic worship, they proclaimed that the Blessed Mary herself had descended into the tomb. She had bathed them in divine radiance and revealed to them the truth of suffering, that every lesion, every poxmark, every agony borne in faith was not punishment, but proof of God's favour. Pain was the crucible through which humanity would be made strong enough to cast down hell itself. The revelation spread like wildfire. Overcome with holy fervour, Solon's followers scattered across the known world, carrying the message wherever their ravaged bodies could still walk. Solon himself journeyed across North Africa and the Mediterranean, preaching amidst plague pits and battlefields alike. Wherever he travelled, new processions formed behind him. Endless caravans of the diseased, the crippled, the outcast, and the broken, all united beneath the belief that affliction was divine purpose made manifest. Over the centuries, the processions of the sacred affliction evolved into something far greater than wandering refugee columns. They became militant congregations of living martyrs, convinced that suffering was not merely symbolic, but transformative. To endure agony was to draw closer to God. To survive it was to become His weapon. Thus the procession swelled, with pilgrims in every corner of Christendom and beyond. Lepers marched beside veterans driven mad by war. Burn victims prayed beside plague carriers. All found welcome within the procession's ranks. Many joined because they had nowhere else to go, and others came because the procession offered something no kingdom or church ever had: unconditional acceptance. Every leper pilgrim remembers the misery that drove them there. Some fled persecution, others shame, others unbearable pain of body or mind. Among the sacred affliction, no suffering is mocked, and no wound is considered meaningless. Initiation into a procession is both terrifying and intimate. Though customs vary between caravans, all honour the ancient rites of pure Tsareth. Before the assembled congregation, each aspirant must confess every sin, fear, humiliation, and torment endured in life before the Lazarus castigators. The confession often lasts for hours, broken repeatedly by sobbing, screaming, or fits of coughing blood. Once the confession is complete, the aspirant walks barefoot through the gathering. Pilgrims reach out to touch them as they pass, murmuring prayers, blessings, and words of comfort. Diseased hands clasp theirs, rotting lips kiss their brow. The procession welcomes the aspirant, not despite their suffering, but because of it. At the end of this walk awaits the Lazarus prophet. During the ritual, the prophet painstakingly engraves the aspirant's confessed sins into a heavy millstone. The stone is then chained to the initiate's body, a burden to be carried for the remainder of their life. Finally, the initiate is granted a new virtue name, symbolizing the death of their former self and their rebirth as one of the sacred affliction. Disease invariably spreads during these rites. Fevers pass from hand to hand, sores rupture, infections bloom. Yet the processions consider this as sacred communion rather than misfortune. To share suffering is to share salvation. Occasionally, however, the wheel of fortune turns in dreadful magnificence. Certain pilgrims become utterly consumed by affliction, every inch of their body transformed by disease and torment. Their nerves burn constantly with unimaginable agony, yet they continue to walk, fight, and pray with terrifying conviction. Such beings are regarded as saints in the making, souls so completely surrendered to suffering that mortal weapons scarcely register upon them. Blade wounds, burns, and bullets mean little compared to the ceaseless torment already writhing beneath their skin. When these pilgrims march to war, they become avatars of divine wrath. On the battlefields of no man's land, the procession of the sacred affliction fight with a savage zeal unmatched by nearly any force in Christendom. Each procession wages war according to its own traditions. The Marian processioners advance behind curtains of sacred fire, wielding crude flamethrowers and hurling bottles of burning pitch into enemy trenches. They descend upon survivors with hooked polearms and bayonets, singing hymns as they butcher the screaming wounded. The Holy Caravan of St. Dunstan favours brutal instruments of punishment, forge hammers, chain flails studded with iron bells, and massive nails driven through the feet of fallen heretics so they may stand before God in proper humility. The wandering nightly processions of St. Lazarus maintain ancient martial traditions, fighting with sword and shield in disciplined formations alongside mounted warbands clad in relic-covered armour. Yet all processions share one sacred weapon above all others: the millstone. The burden each pilgrim carries throughout life may only be removed in battle or ritual execution. When a heretic is defeated, the leper pilgrims bind the heavy stone around their victim's neck before casting them into shell craters, flooded trenches, or the sucking mud of no man's land. Countless heretics have vanished beneath the mire in this fashion, dragged screaming into the earth, while pilgrims recite ecstatic litanies of repentance. To witness such executions is to glimpse the horrifying mercy of the sacred affliction. Even in murder, they offer redemption. The procession possesses little regard for conventional armour. Many pilgrims instead adorn themselves with towering arrangements of holy icons, reliquaries, parchment pairs, and rusted saintly effigies. They believe sincerely that the gaze of the Blessed Mary and the saints can turn aside bullets more effectively than any forged steel. Others abandon protection altogether, charging across the battlefield in little more than rags and bandages, convinced that faith alone renders them untouchable until God decrees otherwise. And often, impossibly, they survive. Artillery tears apart the earth around them, machine gun fire rips through their ranks, clouds of poison gas swallow entire columns whole. Still the bells continue to ring, still the hymns rise, still the pilgrims stagger onward through the smoke with mud in their eyes, blazing in rapturous devotion. For the procession of the sacred affliction do not fear suffering, they worship it. A Lazarist prophet is as much a shepherd of souls as a commander in war. They are the first compassionate face, smiling through bandages to welcome weary aspirants into the road of redemption, where they are reborn with a new name, a new family, and a new creed. They are also the first scarred visage, marked by leonine swellings and a collapsed saddle nose, to greet captured heretics on the road to judgment, burdening them beneath the crushing weight of a limestone crown. Though these encounters appear worlds apart, they serve the same purpose: to correct the failings of mankind and eradicate sin wherever it takes root. Who better to lead the procession of the sacred affliction than those who dwell upon the narrow threshold between spiritual life and physical death? The calling of a Lazarist prophet is believed to be ordained by God long before their birth. Most begin life as humble leper pilgrims devoted to the sacred affliction, enduring the endless trials demanded by the pure Zareth. Through hardship, warfare, and unwavering service to their brethren, they are forged into something greater. They become legs for the crippled, eyes for the blind, and shields for the helpless. They are familiar with every suffering endured by the forgotten souls of this broken world, clothed in little more than festering sores, worn bandages, and a rusted sword. They understand the misery that burdens both themselves and their companions better than any noble priest ever could. It is through this relentless suffering that the future prophet gains a profound understanding of mortality. Standing forever in death's shadow, they glimpse the freedoms that await beyond it, catching fleeting visions of the 12 gates. What good can one accomplish when only a year remains to live, a month, a single day, mere seconds? Every deed grows heavier with purpose as the Lord's holy afflictions ravage the flesh. Tomorrow is uncertain, but today is real. One may begin the pilgrimage now, yet never witness its end. Every question ultimately leads to the same answer. What makes a prophet? Love. Only then does the pilgrim become a prophet. In that moment they come to understand the boundless warmth of God and his dominion over death itself. They witness how divine compassion gives birth to hope, even when all earthly hope has withered away. Mercy triumphs over mortality, offering an escape from finality itself. Every heartbeat becomes another opportunity to guide a lost soul towards salvation, or strike down another servant of apostasy, even if that heartbeat proves to be their last. The Lazarist prophet gathers their afflicted flock close, lamenting the horrors that lie beyond the sanctuary of their holy commune. They point towards a world corrupted by those who opened the gates of hell, allowing pain, war, poverty, and sin to poison the garden of God's creation. Nor do they reserve condemnation solely for those who openly consort with demons. Even those who proudly proclaim themselves good Christians have in the prophet's eyes become complicit, tolerating practices that edge ever closer to heresy, until Satan's grasp tightens around mankind itself. It is not the Lazarists, they proclaim, who deserve lives of suffering. Their burdens are divine gifts bestowed to distinguish the righteous from the idle, and the faithful from the faithless. Every new arrival is called to confession. With hammer and bloody chisel, the prophet carves each transgression into stone, sins that elsewhere the Holy See would answer only with execution. Every failing is laid bare for all to witness. Only when genuine repentance is beyond doubt does the prophet present the pilgrim with their first sacred burden, the millstone, bound forever to the weight of their confessed sins. Displayed openly upon a rope-scarred shoulders, the pilgrim finds themselves with nowhere else to turn. Their former life is gone. Their only family now walks beside them, and the prophet whom they call Father becomes the sole guide capable of leading them toward redemption. Most processions are modest bands of wandering pilgrims, sustained by charity and hardened by war. Others swell into immense congregations, numbering in the tens of thousands, united beneath loose fellowships of Lazarist prophets. These leaders owe one another loyalty, not through rigid hierarchy, but through bonds of shared baptism, mutual respect, and common purpose. They reject elaborate institutions in favor of communities built upon compassion, sacrifice, and faith. Guiding such vast multitudes is no small burden. Entire columns of starving, homeless, and fever-ridden lepers must be fed, sheltered, and protected while continuing their sacred journey. Such a task demands extraordinary cooperation from the faithful. Yet not every Christian city proves willing to bear that burden. Many shut their gates, fearing disease, or unwilling to surrender precious supplies. In doing so, they reject not merely the pilgrims, but the papal bull itself, and the children of God it commands them to aid. Faced with such defiance, some Lazarus prophets believe harsher measures become necessary. Their love for their flock is matched only by their fury towards those who abandon it. In 1909, the war prophet known as Rezin led a procession of 30,000 pilgrims against Bagras fortress. The heretic defenders were overwhelmed beneath a tidal wave of righteous zeal, and the fortress was claimed in the name of the sacred affliction. When Duke Constantine XI later sought to station new Antioch regiments within its walls, he was met with outright refusal. Bagras had not been conquered for princes, generals, or kingdoms. It belonged to the procession, and to the procession alone. No outsider, Christian or otherwise, could claim dominion over what had been purchased with the blood of Lazarus pilgrims. In a bitter irony, some Lazarus prophets reserve their darkest prophecies not for heretics, but for Christian settlements that deny them charity. Such communities, they declare, stand no farther from damnation than those already waiting before the burning gates of hell. The prophets establish camps beyond offending walls, transforming protest into sacred ritual. Through crackling loudspeakers, they thunder brimstone sermons day and night. Merchants attempting to trade with the condemned are captured and judged, and around the encampments rise towering cairns built from the shattered millstones of pilgrims who perished waiting for mercy that never came. Some prophets remain content with protest alone. Others eventually take up arms. When patience is exhausted, entire processions march upon Christian cities, sacking them for provisions and declaring that the burdens of faith must be shared by every child of God, whether willingly or by force. Whether facing errant believers or the armies of hell itself, Lazarus prophets are among the most formidable spiritual leaders upon the battlefield. They stand at the forefront beside their congregation, bearing their own millstones and wearing armor fashioned from sacred relics and shattered saintly icons. Such faith-forged panoply is said to turn aside even heavy gunfire through divine providence alone. Their voices, worn raw by disease and endless preaching, ring across the battlefield with fiery sermons and triumphant hymns. Inspired by visions of heaven's glory, the faithful surge over the trenches and into the enemy's guns without hesitation. Though proficient in the machinery of modern war, Lazarus prophets remain most deadly with simpler weapons. Massive flails extend the crushing weight of their millstones, while colossal anti-tank hammers reduce cursed armor to splintered wreckage. As casualties mount and the faithful begin to fall, the prophet walks among them with an outstretched hand, invoking the gift of sacrament. Through this holy blessing, they dull unbearable pain, preserve the dying a little longer, and slow the corrupting advance of the Black Grail long enough for salvation to remain within reach. When the battle finally ends, when every blade is blunted and every magazine emptied, the prophet gathers the blood-stained millstones of the fallen. Around them they build a funeral pyre, committing each departed pilgrim to God's embrace in one final act of love. Once the flames have died and only embers remain, the prophet gathers what survives of the shattered procession, carrying faith where others carry despair. They follow in the footsteps of Saint Lazarus once more, leading their people onward along the endless road, of devotion, suffering, and holy war. Castigators are a near ubiquitous presence within the ranks of almost every pilgrimage that marches beneath the banners of the faithful. They occupy a role both feared and revered, serving as the foremost arbiters of discipline, morality, and spiritual guidance. Amongst the teeming masses of pilgrims, in many respects, they function much like a non-commissioned officer of a conventional military force. Though their authority extends far beyond matters of simple battlefield order, a castigator is expected not merely to command obedience, but to safeguard the immortal souls of the flock entrusted to them. Within the brutal and unforgiving world of pilgrimages, where starvation, terror, exhaustion, and bloodshed gnaw constantly at the hearts of men and women, the castigators exist to ensure that the fear of divine judgment eclipses fear of the enemy, pain, or death itself. Join us as we once again enter the world of Crusade, and don't forget to like and subscribe as we explore the castigators. To behold a castigator is often to witness a figure seemingly carved from grim scripture. Most are imposing in stature, austere in appearance, clad in severed robes or battle-worn vestments, stripped of all vanity and comfort. Their faces are often lined by hardship, their eyes sharpened by years spent witnessing both martyrdom and human weakness in equal measure. Many possess voices of astonishing power, capable of cutting through cannon fire, ecstatic prayer, and the roar of charging pilgrims alike. It is said that a true castigator can silence an entire mob with a single barked command, or ignite one into righteous fury with only a few thunderous words. Every castigator bears a ceremonial scourge or implement of correction that serves as both badge of office and sacred symbol. The precise form varies greatly according to the orthodoxy, patron saint, and local doctrine. Among the Methodians, castigators commonly wield polished rods of iron or steel, instruments designed to represent measured and disciplined correction rather than cruelty. The Dunstanians favor thick hempen ropes weighted with knots, while the Marians employ terrifying brands and red-hot irons with ritualistic fervor. The Lazarists of the Sacred Affliction often carry scourges, woven from braided leather or knotted locks of hair shorn from their own leper flock, transforming the suffering of the diseased into a weapon against sin itself. Yet, regardless of its physical form, the meaning of the instrument remains singular and universal. It is the whip of God. To the pilgrim masses, the scourge is not merely a tool of punishment, but a visible manifestation of divine judgment itself. It is a reminder that all mortal weaknesses shall one day stand exposed before the Lord. Every strike delivered by a castigator is intended to mirror the spiritual torment awaiting the unrepentant beyond death. Among the faithful, pain is not viewed solely as suffering, but as purification. The body is weak, corruptible, and ever vulnerable to temptation. Pride, wrath, envy, greed, lust, gluttony, and sloth seep endlessly into even the most devout soul, like poison through cracked stone. Thus the castigator stands eternally vigil against moral decay, ready to uncover any trace of corruption and scour it away before it can infect the wider flock. During the long marches across shattered battlefields and plague-ridden wastelands, castigators are responsible for maintaining order within the pilgrimage, They enforce discipline, distribute the commands of the war prophet, and ensure that every pilgrim remains steadfast in purpose. Many serve as confidants and confessors to the prophets themselves, hearing their private admissions of sin and granting absolution for all transgressions that do not fall beneath the authority of the apostolic penitentiary. In truth, few individuals are burdened more heavily than a war prophet, and the castigator often becomes the sole figure permitted to witness the doubts, terrors, and spiritual wounds hidden beneath the prophetic authority. Each evening, typically after Vespers, the castigators hear confessions from the faithful. In smaller pilgrimages, this may occur individually, but within the great hordes, confessions are often conducted en masse, beneath torchlight and incense, while thousands kneel together in mud and ash. Punishment for transgressions vary according to severity and local doctrine. Lesser sins may be absolved through prayer, fasting, additional labor, or vows of silence and deprivation. More serious failings invite harsher correction. The methods of absolution differ greatly between pilgrim traditions. Methodians condemn excessive brutality and regard needless mutilation as wasteful and barbaric, preferring exile, incarceration, or symbolic corporal punishment in most circumstances. Marians, by contrast, embrace pain as a sacred sacrament and often employ branding, severing, or ritual cauterization. Dunstanians favor crushing weights and methods of pressing designed to force sinners to confront the burden of their guilt physically. And among the Lazarists, those found guilty of transgressions are burdened with heavier millstones than those already borne by the diseased faithful, a symbolic representation of sin's spiritual weight, dragging both body and soul toward damnation. When sins become severe or repeated, a castigator's judgment grows merciless. The condemned may be reduced to the ranks of the ecclesiastical prisoners, stripped of dignity and marched towards almost certain martyrdom. In the gravest cases, immediate execution is carried out, so that final judgment may pass directly into the hands of God. Heresy and blasphemy are universally punished with uncompromising brutality. Such offenders are excommunicated on the spot and denied both last rites and sanctified burial, their souls abandoned utterly to divine wrath. To the castigator, few crimes are more abhorrent than willingly turning aside from God's path after swearing oneself to his service. Such betrayal is viewed not merely as weakness, but as spiritual treason against heaven itself. Despite their fearsome reputation, castigators are not solely instruments of punishment. Many also serve vital pastoral and logistical roles within the pilgrimage. They safeguard sacred relics, oversee the shrine and sacristy, distribute provisions, and maintain inventories of weapons, ammunition, food, and holy objects. In poorly organized pilgrimages, they may effectively serve as a quartermaster, judge, prison warden, and clergy simultaneously. It is not uncommon for a castigator to spend the morning overseeing executions, the afternoon hearing confessions, and the evening distributing bread and lamp oil to exhausted pilgrims. In battle, the presence of a castigator is often unmistakable. Some lead directly from the front lines, marching into enemy fire with scourge raised, while roaring litanies of judgment and salvation. Others remain slightly behind the foremost ranks, directing the fury of the pilgrims with disciplined precision, regardless of their exact position. They constantly exhort the faithful towards sacrifice and holy violence, reminding every warrior that martyrdom in the service to the kingdom of heaven is the highest honor attainable by mortal flesh. When morale falters, the castigator is there. When terror spreads through the trenches, the castigator is there. When wavering pilgrims hesitate before machine gun fire or infernal horrors, it is the castigator who drags them back towards the righteous purpose through a mixture of scripture, threats, and the corrective strike of the whip of God. Naturally, such figures become priority targets for heretic assassins and snipers. Veteran castigators often wear scavenged armor plates beneath their robes or carry massive trench shields scarred by bullets and shrapnel. Others reject protection entirely, believing that survival or death lies solely within the hands of the Almighty. These zealots may carry martyrdom pills, sacred icons, or relic fragments instead of armor, trusting divine providence to determine the hour of their death. Though confirmed members of the clergy within their pilgrimages, relatively few castigators are formally educated. In the vast seminaries and ecclesiastical academies of Europa, their role exists largely outside official unified church doctrine, for the church itself does not formally endorse the militant pilgrim processions that have become so widespread across the war-torn frontiers. Subsequently, many castigators exist in a grey area between sanctioned orthodoxy and dangerous fanaticism. Some fringe sects, such as the dreaded Cavalcade of the 10th Plague, are infamous for their horrifying excesses and savage brutality of their spiritual enforcers. Most castigators claim their vocation emerged later in life, through divine revelation or personal trial. They speak of hearing the call of God amidst suffering, war, imprisonment, or despair. Many come from professions already steeped in authority, hardship, and discipline. Veterans, prison wardens, bosuns, executioners, policemen, torturers, schoolmasters, deacons, and even farmers have all proven capable of assuming the mantle with little more than scripture study and sufficient zeal. Others must spend years apprenticed beneath an experienced castigator, learning not only theology and doctrine, but also the grim practicalities of maintaining order amongst the desperate masses. In many cases, they quite literally learn the ropes. Dark rumors follow them wherever they travel. Some whisper that many castigators are themselves former ecclesiastical prisoners who survived impossible martyrdoms. Others claim that certain castigators were once heretics granted miraculous redemption by divine grace. Few dare voice such suspicions openly. However, for the ears of a castigator are said to be ever watchful for signs of doubt and disobedience. For pilgrimages that adhere more closely to official church doctrine, the confirmation of a castigator may be granted in the field by right of a ranking cleric. Ideally, these confirmations are later registered in Rome, so that the castigator's name may be entered into the Vatican archives, amongst the ledgers of the righteous. Many Orthodox castigators dream of one day leading a purified flock safely to the Holy See itself, where they might receive personal recognition and blessing beneath the gaze of the Supreme Pontiff. Very few achieve this ambition. Most are consumed by the endless burdens of war long before such a journey becomes possible, or else they meet martyrdom somewhere in the trenches and ruins of the front. Others care little for the approval of distant authorities in Rome. To those wandering zealots, the judgment of God alone matters. They continue their grim work anonymously, unknown to history and unrecorded by an earthly institution, save the terrified memories of those they command. Wherever they appear, castigators leave profound impressions upon the common people. The sight of a scarred veteran castigator walking the streets of a city far from the front inspires whispered prayers, fearful glances, and sudden pangs of guilt among the sinful. Yet, among the devout, they inspire something closer to awe. Many pilgrimages began with nothing more than a single wandering castigator and a prophet discovered somewhere in the hinterlands. their shared vision igniting the faith of the desperate masses around them. From such small beginnings, entire crusading hordes are born. And from those first stones, cast into the waters of mankind's fear and suffering, a righteous avalanche descends upon the world. To regard the pilgrim processions as little more than crude engines of war is to underestimate the devastating effectiveness of a hammer when brought down upon an enemy's skull. Yet such a view also ignores the fact that the processions rarely march to battle alone. At their forefront often stride the deadly sisterhoods of the stigmata, whose warriors complement the pilgrim's brutal force with lethal precision. For every heretic crushed beneath a pilgrim's flail, a stigmatic nun slips a blade through the weak points of a fallen knight's armour. For every thunderous blast of a punt gun, shattering enemy fortifications, a sharpened iron crucifix silently arcs through the air, cast with uncanny accuracy by a nun racing across the trenches with astonishing speed. Equal parts surgical killers and blood-soaked angels of divine wrath, the stigmatic nuns wage war with a supernatural swiftness that only grows stronger as they endure wounds that would kill ordinary mortals. Welcome back to the world of Trench Crusade. Like and subscribe if you have not done so, and let us dive in to the lore on the sisterhoods of stigmata, the stigmatic nuns of Trench Crusade. The most prominent origins of the sisterhoods of the stigmata can be traced to the oldest of their orders, the Mentellata Sisters of Saint Catherine. Emerging during the formative years of the unified church, Catherine of Siena distinguished herself through remarkable literary and theological skill despite her youth. Yet it was not her intellect that drew the attention of the church hierarchy, but rather her extraordinary mystical visions. In her earliest revelation, Christ himself appeared before her, commanding the young nun to drink from the crimson mixture of blood and divine essence flowing from him. Further visions followed throughout her life, including a mystical marriage to the Son of God, and profound revelations concerning the redemptive power of his endlessly flowing blood. These experiences earned Catherine the title Apostle of the Blood of Christ, and began a lengthy correspondence with Pope Agaptus III, eventually resulting in a personal summons to Rome. According to the sacred accounts, Catherine was led into the deepest chambers beneath the Vatican, where she encountered the terrible and glorious presence of the new Lamb of God. Before her stood a being both divine and horrifying, a distorted figure whose ovine limbs framed a chest heaving with ragged breaths, while blood poured endlessly from countless wounds upon a face she recognized as that of the Redeemer that she had seen in her vision. Overcome with devotion, Catherine drank from the sacred wine as she had during her first revelation. Her sight blurred beneath tears of blood, her body opened with identical wounds, made without mortal cause, and she felt the strength of heaven itself coursing through her. Later, scholars of the Sororum Stigmata would claim this encounter represented a prophetic manifestation of the third Metachrist, despite surviving records placing its appearance generations later. Regardless, Catherine vanished shortly afterwards, leaving behind only a letter describing her transformation, and from this testament, the Mentellata sisters would emerge. The tale of Saint Catherine spread rapidly across Christendom, finding fertile ground in an age increasingly overshadowed by hell's influence. Across old convents and newly founded monasteries alike, nuns began inflicting wounds upon their own bodies and eyes, reporting sensations of divine empowerment and unwavering faith that eclipsed even the terrors of the corpse wars. Yet alongside this newfound conviction came an uncompromising zeal. Having shared in Christ's suffering and tasted the transcendence found within his sacrifice, many stigmatics could not tolerate those they deemed lacking in faith. To them, doubt itself became an intolerable sin. Their practices that were condemned by many within the Church as dangerous excesses and theological deviations eventually prompted the papacy to formally excommunicate these emerging orders of stigmatic nuns during the 15th century. The decree failed to destroy the sisterhoods. Instead, it drove them beyond the reach of the mainstream church and into the war-torn wastelands of the front. There they found common cause among the pilgrim processions. Amid endless battle, the sisterhoods discovered that the blessings bestowed by the sacred stigmata grew stronger when their wounds were inflicted by enemies rather than by their own hands. Over the centuries, warfare transformed from a necessity into a defining aspect of their identity. Modern novices spend as much time mastering swordsmanship as they do studying scripture within hidden convents, earning their blessed stigmata through combat against the enemies of God. Though united by faith and suffering, each sisterhood follows the teaching of its own patron saint and maintains distinct traditions. The Order of the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa pursues spiritual transcendence through extreme mortification of the flesh, seeking a state of divine ecstasy known as transverbration. Its warriors, therefore, enter battle clad in little more than what modesty demands, exposing themselves willingly to pain so that divine suffering may be embraced without hindrance. Such practices, however, stand in direct opposition to official church doctrine. By contrast, the Sisterhood of Saint Hildegard views martial prowess as only one expression of the gifts granted through the blessed stigmata. Alongside warfare, its members devote themselves to artistic and scholarly pursuits, producing music, literature, and theological works. Their studies of the mysterious mystical language known as the lingua ignota have even drawn the interest of the Synod of Strategic Prophecy. Several smaller orders maintain ancient oaths to the Order of St. Lazarus, serving as specialized warrior convents attached to leper night formations or accompanying the many processions of the Sacred Affliction that once existed under Lazarite protection. Other sisterhoods, particularly those attached to more orthodox processions, reject all doctrines concerning the Metachrist entirely. These groups attribute the miraculous abilities solely to the divine providence and strive to uphold traditional values of modesty and obedience. Like the pilgrim processions themselves, the sisterhoods of the stigmata occupy an uneasy position within the unified church. Officially, they remain unrecognized, and their excommunications have never been formally rescinded. Nevertheless, their effectiveness in the Great War has ensured their continued toleration as valuable allies against the forces of hell. Many conservative clergy dismiss them as little different from pagan witch cults, practicing blood magic beneath a veneer of Christian devotion. Yet among the highest princes of the Church, those who have studied the sealed Vatican records concerning the Third Metachrist understand that the truth may be far more troubling. The origins of the stigmatic sisterhoods may not be rooted in heresy at all, but in a divine mystery whose implications threaten the very foundations of the unified Church. The heretic fleet rules the majority of the seven seas, with iron cruelty and infernal might. Only within the Mediterranean do the faithful still contest their dominance, struggling desperately to preserve the lines leading to New Antioch. Beyond those waters, the seas belong to hell. Merchant convoys vanish without warning, coastlines burn in the night, and entire settlements disappear beneath the tides stained red with blood. At the command of the dreaded High Captains, the heretic fleet wages war through three instruments of terror. Foremost among them are the behemoth-class capital ships, monstrous floating fortresses constructed in blasphemous mockery of the ark once commanded by God himself. These colossal vessels drift across the oceans like wandering cities of damnation, serving as mobile strongholds for strike craft, raiding vessels, and the infernal submarines that stalk beneath the waves, hunting military convoys and helpless merchantmen alike. From these hellish armadas emerge the infamous naval raiding parties, elite infantry feared across every coastline of Christendom. In this video, we will be exploring the lore following the dreaded heretic naval raiders. So please like and subscribe as we venture again into the world of Trench Crusade. The armor worn by naval raiders is specially altered to function as diving equipment, allowing entire warbands to infiltrate harbors and shoreline fortifications undetected. The oxygen cylinders carried by the naval anointed contain not merely breathable air, but a natural vapors drawn from the lake of fire itself. These cursed mixtures sustain a raider for up to 66 hours underwater, while granting an unnatural resistance to decompression sickness. Entire strike forces may therefore gather silently beneath enemy shores, waiting unseen in the darkness below the tides before the slaughter begins. Recruitment has never been difficult for the fleets of hell. Numerous infernal nobles claim dominion over the seas, attracting fanatics, pirates, murderers, and worshippers eager to win favor through atrocity. The promise of loot, status, and infernal blessing lures countless souls into service. To these devotees, every raid is an act of worship, the desecration of lands where saints once spread the hated faith of the tyrant god. A favorite tactic of the naval raiders is the dawn assault. Concealed by darkness, they creep toward their prey. Throughout the night, before striking at first light, in blasphemous reverence to the morning star. Militarily, this catches defenders exhausted and unprepared. Spiritually, it serves as ritual mockery, a tribute to the infernal throne the lords of hell dream of one day raising atop Mount Zaphon after overthrowing the seat of Yahweh himself. The raids begin in silence. Lookouts vanish first, their throats torn open by the hooked Tartarus claws of Death Commando. Moments later, silent legionaries emerge from the surf like revenants rising from the abyss, armed with poison gas grenades, suppressed pistols, and heavy boarding axes. Only once confusion and terror spread through the defenders did the sea hags commence their bombardment. These creatures, artillery witches, grotesquely adapted for naval warfare, unleash bombardments of cursed explosives, capable of functioning as sea mines, torpedoes, or artillery shells alike. Their attacks shatter defensive formations and drown fortifications beneath fire and screaming metal. Into the chaos surge elite legionaries, intoxicated by the infernal fumes circulating through their divine apparatus. Descending upon the disoriented defenders, in a berserk fury. The naval raiders are rarely wage prolonged engagements. They possess little heavy armor and few large ground assets. Instead, their doctrine depends entirely upon speed, surprise, and overwhelming brutality. Defensive lines must be penetrated before they can fully form. Engagements are fought at point-blank range with automatic weapons, boarding axes, stabbing blades, and savage hand-to-hand combat, intended to drown resistance in panic before organized defense becomes possible. Competition among the high captains is vicious. Prestige within the fleets is not measured by victory, but by the cruelty and terror inflicted upon the enemies of hell. Each commander, therefore, leaves behind distinct signs of their atrocities, as proof of the responsibility and as instruments of psychological warfare. The 112th Sea Legion, known as the Virtue Breakers, mutilates its victims and employs goetic necromancy to animate severed remains into touching mockeries of life. Rescuers arriving after their raids discover crawling limbs, screaming heads, and quivering flesh scattered across massacred settlements. Meanwhile, the crew of the Serpent-class strike vessel, Discipline of the Burning Water, prefers a different horror. Their captives are dragged beneath the waves and tortured with underwater welding torches. The crew takes particular pride in ensuring their victims perish by drowning and burning simultaneously. The objectives of heretic naval operations vary widely. Some raids exist purely to gather slaves. Others seek the destruction of coastal defenses, the looting of isolated enclaves, espionage, assassination, or the insertion of death commandos tasked with eliminating important clergy and rulers. Yet what the faithful fear most are full-scale invasions. The greatest example remains the landing of 1872, when heretic forces seized Rijeka and established a permanent beachhead within the heartlands of the church. A festering wound described by many as a dagger aimed directly at the heart of Christendom itself. And so, the fleets of the faithful remain ever watchful. From the Gulf of Finland to the coastal fortresses of Demesne in France, from the Capudan Pasha's patrols upon the Sea of Arabia to isolated monasteries guarding storm-lashed islands, sailors and sentries alike stare anxiously at the dark waters beyond their shores. Every fog bank may conceal an infernal strike vessel. Every tide may carry the servants of hell. For in the age of the Great War, the oceans no longer belong to mankind. They belong to the enemies of God. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The transformation endured by every anointed during their pilgrimage through the inferno are as grotesque and varied as the torments of hell itself. Some return with flesh forever blistering beneath unseen flames. Others are marked by a perpetual frostbite, or veins that glow with an eerie, unnatural radiance beneath the skin. Stranger still are the mutations wrought by the unspeakable bargains struck and atrocities committed in the desperate struggle to survive beyond the Hellgate. Few anointed ever speak of what they witnessed in the underworld. Those reckless enough to pry into their past are often met with murderous fury, cut down by warriors whose restraint was burned away long ago in the abyss. Yet despite the horrors each endures, all emerge bearing the same undeniable gift, power purchased through damnation itself. For some, that newfound strength breeds contempt for the chains of their former legion. Casting aside old loyalties, they abandon their comrades in pursuit of the savage freedom offered by the heretic naval fleets. Unlike the rigid discipline of the legions ashore, the heretic fleets embrace a far looser hierarchy. Each vessel ruled according to the whims of its captain, and even so, the anointed almost inevitably rise to positions of authority, most commonly serving as first mates or bosuns. There they revel in the opportunity to impose their terrifying brutality upon the crew, enforcing the captain's will with relentless cruelty. Every perceived slight becomes an excuse for punishment, and the only limit upon an anointed's methods is the dark creativity cultivated during their infernal pilgrimage. For the ordinary heretic sailor, the call to battle against the lapdogs of Yahweh is often a welcome reprieve, if only because the anointed's boundless sadism is redirected towards the enemy. Whether spearheading a thunderous boarding assault or descending upon a sleeping coastal settlement beneath the cover of darkness, the anointed become towering bastions of muscle and tarnished brass, against which the faithful inevitably shatter. They bear the heaviest arms and armor available to the naval raiders, wielding everything from forearm mounted machine guns to colossal blades capable of cleaving a man in two. Their reinforced diving suits transform them into walking fortresses, shrugging off enemy gunfire as though it were little more than sea spray. Endless streams of Stygian gas courses through their breathing apparatus, numbing all pain while sustaining their monstrous endurance. Behind visors pierced by countless eye holes, they perceive far more than the mortal world. The infernal fumes grant them hallucinogenic geist sight, capable of revealing pheromone trails, the faint electrical impulses born of thought, and even the movement of divine grace through a living soul. Neither darkness nor silence offers refuge from such hunters, for an anointed heretic raider can pursue prey by senses unknown to ordinary men, becoming inescapable predators once the hunt has begun. Yet beneath their monstrous strength and blood-soaked reputation, the anointed remain human souls, and thus remain vulnerable to the oldest temptation of all, sin. No being has exploited this weakness more thoroughly than Leviathan, the great beast of the oceans, once prince of Invidia, before being cast down and shackled by the throned tyrant. As the embodiment of envy, Leviathan understands that those who constantly strive to prove their superiority are the easiest to corrupt. It senses the lingering fear buried deep within every anointed, that despite all their newfound strength, they will never escape the helpless terror they felt while walking the smoldering wastes of hell. Leviathan needs only awaken that memory for a fleeting instant, reminding them that another warrior may yet surpass them, and many willingly offer prayers to the abyssal serpent in exchange for greater strength. Across the centuries, Leviathan's whispers have claimed enough anointed to form an entire fleet devoted solely to his worship, the dreaded Leviathan Shoal. Taking the shark as their sacred totem, the Leviathan Shoal ruthlessly culls its own ranks, ensuring only the strongest survive. Their fearsome reputation has become so renowned that anointed from rival fleets willingly abandon their captains, seeking the honor of proving themselves worthy to sail beneath Leviathan's banner. In the name of their abyssal prince, the slow, the weak, and the wounded are butchered and consumed in frenzied rites that serve equally as worship and as declarations of supremacy over the fallen. Their obsession with dominance extends into every battle. Though strong enough to wield impossibly heavy weapons, many deliberately choose the small ritual knives used in their cannibalistic ceremonies, finding greater satisfaction in slaughtering their foes with blades pitifully small in proportion to their monstrous physiques. So relentless is their bloodshed that vast shoals of sharks, eels, and other predators follow the fleet wherever it sails, instinctively drawn by the endless promise of fresh corpses. Once battle is won, friend and foe alike are stripped for meat. The victors glut themselves upon the carnage before hurling whatever remains into the crimson waters, where the waiting predators churn the sea into a frothing red maw. Among the Leviathan show's oldest traditions is the challenge of the chosen son, proclaimed whenever an anointed ascends to the captaincy. At the captain's command, every anointed casts aside their armor and weapons before plunging naked into the circling shoal. The warrior who kills the largest shark with nothing but their bare hands earns the title of chosen son, along with the honor of fastening the beast's corpse to their diving suit as a lasting trophy. There is a bitter irony to the Leviathan shoal. Those who obsess most fervently over proving themselves the strongest of their kind remain utterly obedient to established hierarchies of power. It is precisely this contradiction, their desperate envy for those above them, that the heretic captains carefully cultivate, for only through that gnawing hunger can Leviathan bestow its greatest blessings. The heretic captain is the undisputed ruler of their vessel, and every soul bound to it. Many naval raider captains devote themselves to infernal sea powers, such as Marquis Fornius, Duchess Vepar, Grand Duke Focalor, or even King Vine, regarded as the mightiest spirit of the oceans since God shackled Leviathan. Yet the seas attract more than the lords of the deep. Across the Atlantic, Arabian, and Indian Ocean, Mammon commands vast pirate fleets, driven by greed and conquest. In the Mediterranean, the terrible fleets of Wrath, led by the infamous High Captain Marduk, wage endless war against the Papal fleet and every faithful navy daring to challenge them. In this video, we will take a look at the heretic captains who command these vessels. Please like and subscribe if you have not done so, and let us dive into the depths of Trench Crusade once more. During great campaigns, high captains unite their squadrons with the armies of the Lords of the 66, coordinating invasions between land and sea. Most of the time, however, heretic captains roam freely across their assigned waters, acting according to their own ambition and cruelty. Some gather into marauding fleets, whilst others hunt alone. Each is entrusted with a patrol zone or a vital trade route, with standing orders to strike faithful merchant convoys, ambush warships, cripple enemy supply lines, and spread terror among vulnerable coastal settlements. A heretic captain serves not only as commander, but also as the high priest of their ship. They distribute plunder, decide promotions and punishments, and choose the targets of every raid. Crews are recruited entirely at the captain's whim, whether through loyalty, bribery, coercion, or enslavement. Their authority extends beyond the mortal realm. Every heretic vessel houses a shrine to its patron demon. In the suffocating confines of the dreaded heretic submarines, this may be little more than a portable altar lit by candles, while the cavernous halls of Behemoth-class warships may conceal an entire infernal temple deep within its hull, complete with sacrificial altars stained by endless offerings. The secrets of goetic navigation are among the captain's most fiercely guarded possessions. Only they know the rites, sacrifices, and forbidden rituals required to summon unnatural sea fogs that cloak their fleets during raids. More vital still are the sacred radio frequencies through which heretic high command transmits its orders. These transmissions swarm, with cacodemons lurking within the airwaves, entities capable of driving unprepared listeners into madness or even possession. Only the captain knows the rituals necessary to silence these horrors, long enough to interpret the messages safely. Without such knowledge, coordination between heretic fleets would collapse, and warnings about pursuing faithful warships would never reach their intended recipients. Within the infamous heretic submarines, captains alone possess the sigils and launch codes required to deploy revenant torpedoes. These dreadful weapons carry both explosive charges and living sacrifices. Prisoners, wretched slaves, or unfortunate crewmen who have earned their captain's wrath are crippled and crammed into cramped compartments within the torpedoes themselves. As the missile travels, the infernal sigils etched into its frame generate impossible heat by feeding upon the victim's suffering. The exact timing of death is essential. At the instant the sacrifice perishes, the torpedo briefly slips between Earth and Hell, allowing it to pass through armor before detonating inside the enemy vessel. Because of this horrifying power, revenant torpedoes are feared throughout every ocean touched by the heretic fleets. Captains also guide their crews in worship and sacrifice to their infernal patrons, constantly watching for signs of disloyalty. Rival demons tempt ambitious crewmen with promises of power and mutiny, and the captain must root out such corruption before it festers. In their role as spiritual shepherds, heretic captains often manipulate weaker minds into profound despair and self-loathing, encouraging the broken and hopeless to cast themselves into the sea, chained beneath heavy weights. Those who perish under such guidance are far more likely to rise again as undead choristers from the ocean depths. Each infernal patron imposes its own demands and taboos upon the captains who serve beneath it. Duchess Vepar decrees that every vessel sworn to her command must be captained by a woman. King Vine, by contrast, requires his servants to keep nests of vipers within their quarters and carry serpents upon their person at all times. Such vows bind the captains ever tighter to the whims of hell. In times of catastrophe, desperate battle, or impossible missions, heretic captains may call directly upon their patron for supernatural aid. Such assistance is often granted, but never freely. Every boon demands new vows, harsher restrictions, and deeper submission to infernal law. Over the years, these obligations accumulate, slowly eroding what little humanity the captain still possesses. Their crews begin to regard them with a mixture of awe, fear, and resentment, for the captain becomes something increasingly alien, no longer entirely mortal, yet not fully demonic either. This isolation transforms heretic captains into paranoid and deeply unsettling figures. They become consumed by the voices and commands of their infernal masters, driven to pursue increasingly bizarre and terrible ambitions, as their patrons' demands grow more complex with every passing year. The countless sacrifices offered in a captain's name can earn extraordinary blessings from hell. Some are gifted with armor that constantly bleeds from every seam, an endless flow of supernatural blood granting immense strength and unnatural longevity, so long as sacrifices and plunder continue unabated. Yet infernal favor is never stable. Should a patron grow displeased, these blessings can swiftly become instruments of torment. Life-giving blood may turn to boiling fluid drawn from the depths of the earth, while once protective armor may suddenly tighten and crush its wearer beneath pressures equal to the deepest ocean trenches. To be a heretic captain is to walk a dangerous line, to gaze into the depths of the abyss, to see the horrors at which it holds, and to decide to command them. Only the most powerful become heretic captains, as any weaker would not survive. Throughout history, even the holiest souls have known the bitter sting of envy. They watch as fortune smiles endlessly upon the undeserving, while their own righteous labors seem ignored by heaven. In the silence of lonely nights they whisper, "Why are they blessed while I remain forgotten?" Yet no divine answer comes. Only the hollow echo of their own question reverberates within them, feeding a wound that grows deeper with every unanswered prayer. Such is the nature of envy. It festers quietly, swelling beneath the surface, until bitterness overwhelms conviction. Those who surrender to its venom abandon faith not through careful thought, but through an eruption of resentment and despair. Many are drawn into the blood-soaked legions that march beneath the banner of Moloch, the infanticide king and the serpent head of envy. Just as Cain raised his hand against Abel, jealousy continues to transform wounded hearts into willing murderers. Yet envy is not content merely to destroy others. It devours its victims from within, driving many towards self-destruction. Countless despairing souls seek oblivion beneath the waves, believing the endless sea will bury both their shame and longing forever. Instead, they discover something far older waiting in the darkness. Their choice was never truly their own, but the design of an ancient intelligence whose influence reaches beyond mortal understanding. As seawater floods their lungs, another voice replaces the gnawing ache of desire. It is vast, overwhelming, and impossible to ignore. This is the song of Leviathan, the dreadful hymn of one of God's earliest creations. Imprisoned beneath the deepest reaches of the ocean, bound in darkness since the dawn of time, the colossal demon dreams of overthrowing Moloch and claiming dominion over envy itself. Those who hear its impossible melody do not perish. They are remade as unwilling heralds of its coming reign, until their bodies finally decay, or Leviathan itself claims them. These cursed souls wander as living choirs, forever singing of their master's inevitable ascension to the black clismos of envy. When the earliest heretic submarines first encountered these spectral beings, they quickly recognized their terrible potential. Retrieved from the depths and brought aboard, the revenants were armed with diving bells filled with abyssal seawater and deployed alongside naval raiding forces, much as land-bound heretic choristers served terrestrial armies. These revenants became known as drowned choristers. They drift across solid ground as though suspended beneath invisible tides, their bodies weighed down by the same chains and stones once used to drag themselves beneath the sea. Their haunting hymns carry over trenches like a creeping mist, though only a faint echo of the Leviathan's true song. The melody is enough to awaken poisonous thoughts within all who hear it, filling hearts with comparison, resentment, and consuming jealousy. Some wield sacrificial blades, offering screaming victims to grotesque sea creatures carried within their unnatural floods. Others carry corroded swords and battered shields, challenging foes to ritual combat while their song slowly erodes every trace of confidence and resolve. Those who survive such encounters often describe feeling defeated long before their steel ever crossed. When not upon the battlefield, drowned choristers gather aboard heretic submarines, whispering and singing in broken falsettos beside infernal captains. Their cryptic verses speak of hidden kingdoms beneath the sea and of immeasurable strength waiting within the endless black abyss. More troubling still, scholars among the faithful have begun documenting an alarming pattern. Survivors of near-fatal drownings increasingly report hearing an impossibly beautiful song lingering within their minds long after their rescue. No amount of prayer, medicine, or discipline has succeeded in silencing its call. Many become hopelessly obsessed, sacrificing sanity, family, and eventually their own lives in desperate attempts to hear its overwhelming magnificence once again. These tragedies have coincided with the dramatic rise in drowned choristers, accompanying heretic naval raiding parties operating throughout the Carcass front along the Levantine coast. Even more feared, however, are the gatherings known as drowned choirs. Unlike ordinary choristers, these entities seek not heretic fleets, but one another. Their campaigns begin without firing cannons or boarding hooks. Instead, they arrive beneath the cover of darkness, their mournful harmonies slipping into the dreams of sleeping villages. Throughout the night, their songs entwine with nightmares, magnifying every buried insecurity, every old resentment, every private humiliation. Within days, entire coastal communities collapse into murderous paranoia and consuming jealousy. Neighbors butcher neighbors, families tear themselves apart. Those spared by violence invariably march into the sea of their own accord, surrendering themselves to the choir's embrace. As the choir drifts from settlement to settlement, every drowned victim swells its numbers. Over time, the choristers no longer remain separate beings. Their sodden bodies twist together into vast colonies of fused flesh, siphonophores, more than anything recognizably human. This grotesque organism is called a Leviathan chorus. It embodies envy in its purest form, indiscriminate, possessive, and utterly consuming. It covets everything, destroys everything, and leaves behind only hollow ruin in pursuit of desires that can never truly be fulfilled. With sightings of drowned choirs increasing across the Carcass front, the Ministry of the Propaganda of Virtue has invested immense fortunes in a renewed campaign urging every citizen of the faithful to memorize the warning found in Proverbs 27:4. Wrath is cruel and anger is overwhelming, but who can stand before jealousy? In 1865, the Heraclian earthquake tore through the northern coast of Crete with a violence that seemed almost apocalyptic. The earth did not simply tremble, it convulsed, splitting stone and shattering cities, as though the world itself recoiled in agony. The shockwaves spread far beyond the island, rippling across Anatolia, the Levant, and deep into North Africa. Entire settlements were erased in moments, their people buried beneath collapsing walls or swallowed by the earth itself. Survivors would later speak of the sound, not a rumble, but a roar, as if something vast and unseen had awakened beneath the crust of the world. Yet it was the sea that carried the true horror. Across the Mediterranean, the waters rose in monstrous swells, waves cresting higher than any storm had ever produced. Ships vanished without a trace, coastal cities were drowned in moments, These waves did not move as natural tides. They surged with a terrible purpose, converging and compounding as they were drawn into the narrowing throat of the Gulf of Alexandretta. There, the force of the sea was compressed into something far more dreadful. By the time it neared the isolated town of Dorithal, the wave had become a towering wall, a moving cliff of black water, said to reach nearly 1,000 feet into the sky. It blotted out the horizon, devouring light itself. The townsfolk, with nowhere to flee, gathered along the shore in stunned silence. Some wept, others fell to their knees in prayer. All understood that they were witnessing the end, not only of their town, but of themselves. Their cries rose into the wind, desperate appeals to a god who had long seemed distant, in a world consumed by war and damnation. But then, something answered. Before their eyes, the onrushing wave began to falter. Its advance slowed, as though it pressed against an invisible barrier. The ground trembled beneath their feet, not with the violence of the earthquake, but with a deep, resonant vibration, like the echo of something vast shifting in its sleep. The sea heaved and churned, foam boiling along its towering face. Yet it could advance no further. Half a mile from the shore, the wave stopped. It hung there, impossibly suspended, a vast, terrible wall of water, held in place by a force none could comprehend. The townspeople stared in awe and terror, uncertain whether they had been saved or merely granted a moment's reprieve before annihilation. The sea itself seemed alive, writhing and seething, rippling like the hide of some enormous beast denied its prey. Then, just as suddenly as it halted, the water began to recede. Slowly at first, then with gathering speed, the immense wave drew back into the depths, leaving behind a landscape no human eyes were meant to see. The seabed stretched out before them, exposed and glistening beneath the dim light. It was a graveyard. Broken ships lay scattered like discarded toys. Bodies of the drowned, some fresh, others long dead, were strewn across the mud and stone. Debris from distant lands lay tangled together, carried across the sea by the waves' terrible reach. And at the heart of it all, revealed by the retreating waters, stood something far older. An immense structure, half buried and broken, lay canted at a strange angle. It was a temple, or something that resembled one, but its design was alien, its proportions vast beyond reason. Its surfaces were carved from a greenish-black stone that seemed to swallow the light. Its texture, unlike any material known to man. No tool marks could be seen upon it, no sign of human craftsmanship. It was as though it had not been built, but grown. Most of the townsfolk recoiled at the sight, overcome by an instinctive dread, but a handful, driven by curiosity or by faith, descended into the exposed seabed and approached the ruin. Within its fractured halls they found the obelisk. It rose from the heart of the temple like a jagged tooth, its surface serrated and uneven, yet unmistakably deliberate in its form. It was colossal, far too large to have been moved by any natural force, and far too unnatural to belong to any living thing. The same green-black stone composed it, and from it emanated a presence that could be felt rather than seen. The air around it seemed heavy, charged with a pressure that pressed against the mind as much as the body. Some wept openly, others whispered prayers. All felt the same overwhelming uncertainty. That this was no accident, that they had been spared for a reason. Before the sea could reclaim the temple, the townsfolk returned in force. With ropes, levers, and sheer desperation, they dragged the obelisk from the ruin and hauled it up the jagged cliffs overlooking Dorith Hall. It was a task that should have been impossible, yet they completed it with fervor, bordering on madness. At the summit of a barren hill, they raised it upright, anchoring it deep into the earth. They named it the Altar of Leviathan, and from that day onward, it became the center of their existence and their secrecy. In the years that followed, war raged across the world. The forces of the faithful clashed endlessly with the damned, their battles leaving entire regions in ruin. Yet Dorith Hall remained untouched. Armies passed nearby without noticing it. Scouts failed to record its presence. It was as though the town's existence was beyond the awareness of the world itself. The people did not question their fortune, for they understood its source. Offerings were made at the altar. At first, simple things: food, wine, gold, livestock. Each gift was laid carefully at its base, accompanied by prayers of gratitude and supplication, and always the town remained safe. But over time, a change took hold. The offerings grew larger, more frequent, and when hardship came, when crops failed or sickness spread, the townsfolk found that lesser gifts no longer seemed sufficient. The altar did not speak, yet its hunger was felt all the same. In 1871, that hunger was tested. A heretic submarine, known as the Congregant of Mammon, surfaced just beyond the harbour. Its iron hull arose from the depths like a beast of war, and from it emerged armoured figures clad in profane designs. They advanced towards Dorith Hall without hesitation, their intent unmistakable. Panic swept the town. For the first time in years, their sanctuary had been found. Desperation drove them back to the altar. What they offered that night was no longer symbolic. No records remain of what occurred. No words are spoken of it, even in whispers. But when the submarine was later discovered drifting near Cyprus, it was a hollow shell. Its crew had vanished without a trace. The interior was smeared with blood, and its bulkheads painted crimson from floor to ceiling. Dorith Hall was left untouched once more, and so the ritual endured. To this day, on the darkest night of each year, the townsfolk ascend the hill in silence. There, beneath the looming shadow of the altar of Leviathan, they leave behind an offering that none dare name. When it is done, they return to their homes with haste, sealing their doors with iron nails and marking them with symbols whose meanings have long been forgotten. As night deepens, a thick fog rolls in from the sea, unnatural in its stillness. It coils through the streets, swallowing sound and light alike. Then come the footsteps, slow, heavy, and wet, echoing along the cobbled roads. Inside their homes, the people of Dorith Hall wait in silent terror. No fire is lit, no voice is raised. Each family listens, praying that whatever walks beyond their door will pass them by. But when the dawn finally breaks, the fog is gone, and one house stands empty. the living souls who once occupied it, taken by unknown captor and never seen again. This is the price of their peace, the price to the altar. This is the demand of Leviathan, and Dorithal will continue to fulfill it as long as they keep their peace. So, one thing that instantly popped into my mind while reading this is it's very Lovecraftian. It reminds me a lot of The People of Innsmouth, which is a H.P. Lovecraft story where a man goes to a village where everyone is fish people. And I don't know if it's just because, we're talking about Leviathan, who is, the demon lord of the seas. And also, Leviathan is the leader of the Sea of Sloth, or the Ring of Sloth, I believe. The dead had always been a part of the landscape of the Great War against Hell. For centuries, the battlefields of Christendom were choked with the corpses, left where they had fallen, abandoned beneath poisoned rain and blackened skies. Men died in such unimaginable numbers that no army, no matter how devoted, could hope to reclaim them all. Bodies lay tangled in the mud between trench lines, half submerged in crater lakes of blood and ash, their armour rusting around them, while carrion birds wheeled overhead in endless spirals. The fields between armies became vast necropolises, where the slain of 1,000 battles slowly disappeared beneath layers of filth, clay, and fresh dead. At first, the Church saw this as a grim necessity. The soul, after all, belonged to God, and the body was merely a vessel of mortal flesh. Yet by the latter years of the 16th century, disturbing reports began to emerge from the frontiers surrounding Jerusalem and the Hellgate. Patrols discovered heretic legionaries dragging corpses away under cover of darkness. Entire wagon trains of the dead vanished into the smoke beyond enemy lines. Trenches once overflowing with the fallen defenders were found stripped bare by dawn, leaving behind only gouged earth and the long trails of congealed blood leading into the wastelands claimed by Hell. At first, this incident was dismissed as battlefield scavenging, but then came the testimonies. Survivors spoke of hearing screams from the enemy camps long after battles had ended, screams that did not sound like the living. Captured heretics raved of vast flesh foundries beneath the inferno, where the bodies of the faithful were broken apart and remade into things no human mind could fully comprehend. Others claimed the dead were sewn into hideous hides of demons, or hollowed out and used as vessels for infernal spirits, seeking passage into the mortal realm. One dying crusader spoke of seeing his fallen comrades marching again days after their deaths, their bodies twisted into mockeries of sainthood, their mouths stuffed with burning coal, while they chanted praises to the adversary. These accounts spread terror through the armies of the Church. The Synod of Strategic Prophecy convened in secrecy beneath the catacombs of Rome. Theologians, military commanders, and blind prophet monks studied the reports for months before reaching a conclusion so horrifying that many present were said to have wept openly upon hearing it. Hell was not merely harvesting the dead for desecration. It was claiming them for some greater and more terrible purpose. One, the Synod, declared too spiritually catastrophic to ever be written down in mortal scripture. In desperation, the Council of Saints petitioned for divine intervention. Their answer came in the form of one of the paladins. Paladin Geren was already a figure of myth by the time he descended into hell. Geren was among the most feared warriors in Christendom. It is said when he entered the Inferno alone, through the breaches beneath Jerusalem, clad in silvered armour, inscribed with every known ward against corruption, all hell shivered. Then, without warning, he returned. The paladin emerged from beneath the Castel Sant'Angelo, blackened by soot and carrying wounds no earthly weapon could have inflicted, while his once white surcoat hung in tatters, stained with ash and something darker still. Geren was brought immediately before the Council of Saints. What he told them has never been recorded, but whatever Geren revealed changed the Church forever. And within the year, the Demetrian Order of Reclamation was founded. The Order's purpose was simple in principle and monstrous in execution. No body sworn to God could be allowed to fall into the hands of hell. Across the frontiers, specialized retrieval companies began operating under the protection of heavily armed trench militias. These grim processions advanced onto the battlefield moments after fighting ceased, gathering the fallen under constant threat of artillery fire, demon incursions, and heretic raids. The work was hideous beyond measure. Men waded waist-deep through piles of ruptured corpses, disentangling limbs from barbed wire, while plague flies swarmed in suffocating clouds. The recovered bodies travelled upon what soldiers soon named the corpse rails. The trains themselves were monstrous things, iron locomotives hauling endless chains of black freight wagons, packed floor to ceiling with cadavers. Fluid seeped constantly from the garages, forming thick trails of blood and embalming oils along the tracks. In hot weather, the rails glistened, wet for miles behind the passing trains, earning them their infamous title among frontline troops. Entire villages learned to recognize the approach of the corporeal trains, not by sight, but by smell, a suffocating mixture of rot, smoke, mire, and disinfectant that lingered for days after the trains had passed. At first, small processing depots handled the burden, but the war only intensified, the dead only multiplied, beyond all prediction. The existing facilities had collapsed beneath the sheer scale of slaughter, forcing the Church to undertake one of the largest construction projects in its history, the Domus Demetrius. Known among soldiers simply as the Body Barn, the Domus Demetrius was erected in the Amanus Mountains atop the ruins of civilizations, layered one atop another, like graves in a mass burial. The foundations rested upon the shattered remains of an ancient Templar fortress, itself built over older Byzantine walls destroyed centuries earlier during the Seljuk invasions preceding the opening of the Hell Gate. Workers claimed strange sounds echoed up from beneath the foundations during construction. Distant hammering, muffled cries, and the grinding of unseen machinery deep underground. But such reports were dismissed as exhaustion and mountain madness. The completed structure was colossal. Miles of iron-framed halls stretched across the mountain valleys like the skeletons of some titanic beasts. Vast smokestacks belched grey fumes endlessly into the sky, while great furnaces burned day and night to power the machinery within. Corpse cranes swung ceaselessly overhead, lifting entire nets filled with bodies from incoming rail wagons. Endless rows of embalming silos towered above the processing chambers, each capable of holding thousands of corpses, suspended in preserving chemicals and sacred oils. Storage bays the size of cathedrals housed mountains of coffins, burial shrouds, and stacked body bags awaiting transport to the necropolis caves beneath Crete. Every corpse entered the domus passed first through the great Heretics. This vast entrance chamber was dominated by the Ciborium Demetrius, an immense columned reliquary suspended high above the chamber floor by iron chains thicker than a man's torso. Within the Ciborium rested what the church claimed were the earthly remains of Saint Demetrius himself. Day and night, a strange rain dripped steadily from beneath the reliquary onto the dead below. Officially, the liquid was merely a potent disinfectant compound, but few believed this. The air around the Ciborium reeked overpoweringly of myrrh, incense, and ancient tombs. The liquid was warm to the touch, even in winter, and corpses passing beneath it were said to emerge strangely altered. Some reclaimers swore the dead briefly opened their eyes as the droplets struck them. The monks dismissed such stories as superstition, but none could explain why the liquid never ceased flowing, despite no visible source replenishing it. Within the processing halls, the Demetrian monks moved silently among the dead in ash-grey robes coated with wax and embalming fluids. Their lives were dedicated entirely to preserving corpses from infernal corruption. As bodies were cleaned, stitched, drained, and wrapped, the monks continuously recited passages from the Corpus Benedictationis, an immense liturgical work believed capable of severing hell's claim upon mortal flesh. The chanting never stopped. Thousands of voices echoed endlessly through the chambers of the domus, rising and falling in droning unison like the sound of distant machinery. Workers who spent too long inside the complex often reported hearing the prayers even after leaving, as though the words had become trapped inside their skulls. Once sanctified, the dead were loaded onto rusted transport hulks bound for Crete, where immense corpse caves had been carved beneath the island over centuries of war. Many of these ships never arrived. Some vanished during storms, others were sunk by heretic raiders, or dragged beneath the waves by things sighted moving beneath the Mediterranean at night. Yet still the ships sailed, for the dead continued to come in numbers beyond counting. And now, in the present age, the Domus Demetrius is failing. The war has consumed too much. Fuel shortages plague the furnaces. Entire sections of the complex stand dark and abandoned. The corpse rails still arrive every hour of every day, but there are too few monks left to process their cargo. Mountains of corpses now fill the storage halls, so completely that they press against the iron rafters hundreds of yards overhead. Rivers of blood and preserving fluids run constantly across the tiled floors, while methane fires flicker blue in the darkness between the corpse piles. The smell is said to cling to the mountains for leagues. Worse still are the rumors. Whispers spread among workers and reclaimers that something has entered the forgotten undercrofts beneath the domus. Entire maintenance crews vanish in the lower tunnels. Strange sounds echo upward through drainage grates at night. Wet chewing noises, distant shrieks, and the scrape of claws against stone. Some claim vast carrion feeders dwell below the complex now, tunneling upward through corpse mountains and feeding solely upon the dead from within. The Demetrian monks deny everything. They insist the ancient catacombs beneath the domus remain sealed behind immovable iron doors, bearing the archaic sigils dating back to the Sultanate era. No monk willingly approaches those doors. The metal is black with age, covered in chains, crusted solid, with centuries of wax seals and prayer parchments. Even the air near them feels wrong, unnaturally cold, heavy with the scent of damp earth and old graves. No one knows what lies beyond them. And in truth, no one stationed at the body barn truly wishes to know. It is merely part of the process, and no one wishes to disturb it. So, the year of the Broken Trinity marked one of the darkest campaigns in the long agony of the Levantine front. In that cursed year, the armies of hell abandoned the slow attritional warfare that had defined the conflict for generations, and instead unleashed a devastating offensive intended to shatter the eastern bastions of the faithful in a single stroke. From the ash-choked plains west of Aleppo to the marshlands surrounding New Antioch, the earth itself trembled beneath the advance of the heretic war machine. The first assaults came in endless waves. Millions of damned infantry surged against the western fortifications, in tides so vast that survivors claimed the horizon disappeared beneath moving flesh. The trenches burned beneath artillery fire and sacrificial bombardments, while towering demon engines dragged themselves through curtains of smoke and poisoned fog. Yet this assault, terrible as it was, served only as a distraction. The true blow fell further north. The immense armoured spearhead broke through near Aintab and drove southward through the Guillemot Gap with terrifying speed. It was an army unlike anything the faithful had faced before. Colossal infernal tanks forged in the furnaces of hell, iron leviathans driven by bound demons and fueled by liquefied human remains. Their hulls bore blasphemous sigils etched in blood and brass. Their exhausts belched black smoke, thick with screaming faces, and their cannons hurled shells capable of collapsing entire fortress walls in a single strike. The great fortress of Roche Guillaume, long believed impregnable, was rendered hopeless before the advance even reached its walls. Artillery witches infiltrated the eastern approaches under veils of unnatural darkness, summoning storms of burning iron from hidden circles carved into the earth. Simultaneously, sea hags emerged along the western coastlines, vomiting floods of abyssal bile and calling tidal waves against the defenders. Trapped between land and sea, Roche Guillaume endured a bombardment without end. Entire towers vanished in pillars of fire, while the fortress cathedrals collapsed atop congregations, still singing hymns of defiance. The neighbouring strongholds of Bath-e-Mullin and Kilmouth suffered no better fate. Goetic tempests descended upon them, storms of crimson lightning and whispering ash that stripped flesh from bone and turned stone walls to molten slag. As these bastions died, the main heretic force smashed through the Trebasic and the Yagra defense zones, annihilating centuries of fortifications in mere days. Soon the road to New Antioch lay open. The heretic spearhead advanced eastward, skirting the vast lake of Antioch, whose waters had become central to the Duke's ambitions of hydroelectric works. Refugees fleeing the front clogged the roads, only to be crushed beneath tank treads or obliterated by aerial bombardments from infernal aircraft. Above them all, the fledgling air fleets of the faithful launched desperate raids against the advancing columns. Day after day, squadrons of patched-together bombers and relic-driven attack craft hurled themselves at the enemy armor. Their courage became legendary. Their losses became catastrophic. Again and again, faithful pilots descended through the storms of anti-air fire and clouds of demonically guided flak, only to see their bombs glance harmlessly from infernal armor. Entire wings vanished in pillars of black flame. Some aircraft returned missing half their crews. Others returned with the dead still strapped inside, their corpses fused into the metal by unnatural heat. Yet despite the sacrifice, the heretic advance never slowed. As panic spread through New Antioch, many believed the city doomed. The Duke of New Antioch, however, conceived one final plan, a strategy born not from hope of victory, but from the acceptance of horrifying necessity. A proclamation was issued throughout the city and beyond. Any soul who marched to defend New Antioch, regardless of crime, heresy, debt, or sin, would receive total absolution before God. Murderers, thieves, deserters, fanatics, beggars, and pilgrims all answered the call. Within hours, colossal crowds gathered beneath the city walls. Thousands of reliquary banners fluttered above the masses, while priests screamed blessings over the roar of cathedral bells. By dawn, a numberless host marched northward toward the Iron Bridge. Witnesses later described the scene as resembling a crusade from the final days of the world. Pilgrims advanced barefoot, through dust and blood, chanting the Duke's name in endless rhythm. Some carried rusted weapons, others carried only icons and bones of saints. Entire families walked together into death willingly. The army possessed almost no armor and little hope of survival, yet not one among them turned back. The clash occurred on the plains north of the Iron Bridge. Against the infernal tanks, the pilgrims stood no chance. The heretic machines rolled into them like iron mountains, crushing bodies beneath grinding tracks and shredding masses of flesh with rotary cannons and flame projectors. The slaughter was beyond comprehension. Bodies piled so high around the advancing armor that the tanks began to slow, their tracks choking with bone, blood, and ruined flesh. Only then did the Duke's intention become clear. Far to the east, engineers stationed at the Patricius Dam carried out their final orders. Knowing they would perish alongside thousands below, they detonated the ancient structure. The dam shattered with a roar that echoed across the entire valley. Millions upon millions of gallons erupted across the plains. The flood struck with apocalyptic force. Pilgrims and heretics alike vanished beneath walls of black water filled with debris. Shattered machinery and uprooted earth, tanks weighing hundreds of tons were hurled sideways or dragged into deepening mud. Entire companies disappeared screaming into whirlpools of blood and silt. Those who survived the initial deluge found themselves trapped within a vast sucking mire, where every movement dragged them deeper. The plain became a grave, and then the sky darkened. The rebuilt air fleets of the faithful descended from the clouds in enormous numbers, their hulls newly armed and blessed for the slaughter to come. With the heretic armor immobilized in the mud, the bombers attacked relentlessly. Firestorms engulfed the stranded tanks. Ammunition stores detonated in chains of explosions, visible for miles. Infernal crews burned alive within the possessed steel coffins, while trapped demons screamed through ruptured engine vents. For 3 days and nights the bombardment continued, and when at last it ended, the battlefield had become something beyond a mere war zone. Twisted wreckage protruded from hardened mud like the bones of dead giants. Burned corpses lay fused into melted armor plating. Skeletons blackened by fire clung to ruined hatches as though still trying to escape. The air itself carried the stench of diesel, scorched flesh, and stagnant water. The heretic offensive had been stopped, yet victory came at a terrible cost. Attempts were made in later years to cleanse the battlefield and recover the dead, but such efforts ended only in disaster. Unexploded ordnance buried beneath the mud detonated without warning. Salvage teams vanished after recovering cursed sigils carved into tank hulls. Priests sent to sanctify the ground repeatedly burst into flames mid-sermon, or were driven mad by voices whispering beneath the earth. Eventually, the area was abandoned entirely. The region became known as the Steel Necropolis. A colossal cruciform monument was raised overlooking the flooded plains to honor the sacrifice of those who died saving New Antioch. Pilgrims still journey there in vast numbers, though few remain entirely sane for long. Strange cults roam the rusting graveyard, drawn by what they call the divine diesel. They chant mechanically hymns to a mysterious tank god, an imagined deity of iron, gasoline, smoke, and endless war. At night, their processions wander between the wrecks, carrying lanterns made from shell casings, and chanting prayers in imitation of grinding engines and cannon fire. The necropolis remains a place of unrelenting terror. Faces can still be seen beneath the vitrified mud, preserved as though screaming in the moment of death. Some claim the mud itself moves when no wind blows. Others speak of ghostly tank crews pounding from inside sealed hulls, begging rescuers to open the hatches. Those foolish enough to answer the cries are often found days later, dragged waist deep into the mire, their bodies twisted and broken, as though something beneath the earth tried to pull them under. Worst of all are the dead of New Antioch themselves. Though hailed as martyrs by the church, they are no more at peace than the heretics. The pilgrims who sacrifice themselves remain bound to the mud and steel at the battlefield, driven by agony, betrayal, and an endless instinct to drag the living down into the depths with them. In the Steel Necropolis, sainthood and damnation have long since become impossible to distinguish. Nineveh was once the greatest metropolis of the ancient world, the mighty capital of the Assyrian Empire, and the throne of ruthless kings whose cruelty became legendary. Its corruption and wickedness were so great that the prophets Saints Jonah, Nahum, and Zephaniah each proclaimed its inevitable destruction, warning that the Lord would stretch out his hand against the north, destroy Assyria, and leave Nineveh desolate to the wilderness. Fearing the fate foretold by the prophets, many inhabitants abandoned the doomed city long before its final ruin. They journeyed westward until they discovered the forgotten remains of an ancient settlement northwest of Aleppo. Among these refugees were scholars consumed by dark ambition, men who had deciphered the mystical tablets attributed to King Solomon and carried with them hidden collections of forbidden grimoires and cuneiform inscriptions containing the oldest forms of Mesopotamian sorcery. They believed themselves to be the rightful successors of the ancient Egyptian magi, who had once fled before the armies of Alexander the Great, never realizing that the knowledge they treasured was itself the source of the divine judgment pursuing them. The settlement they established rose beneath the shattered ruins of the abandoned city and became known as Nineveh Novus. Above ground, little remained visible beyond the scorched remnants of a once grand temple protruding from endless seas of sand. Beneath the desert, however, the sorcerers slowly constructed a vast hidden metropolis through the practices of hermetic magic. Powerful enchantments cloaked the city behind relentless sandstorms capable of stripping flesh from bone, while bound desert demons were commanded to destroy any traveler who wandered too close. Confident in their magical defenses, the scholars believed themselves beyond the reach of earthly rulers, and even beyond the judgment of heaven itself. For centuries, their confidence appeared justified. Great subterranean libraries were carved into the stone and filled with knowledge gathered through communion with supernatural powers. Countless vaults housed relics, cursed artifacts, and magical treasures recovered from across the world. Retrieving these objects fell to the Knights of Solomon, an elite martial brotherhood whose sacred mission was to seek out items of mystical significance, seize them by whatever means necessary, and deliver them to the hidden city for study and preservation. For more than 1,000 years, Nineveh Novus remained concealed from the outside world through the strength of its arcane wards. Yet no amount of sorcery could forever delay the consequences of unrestrained pride. In their relentless pursuit of divine understanding, the scholars committed the ultimate blasphemy by experimenting upon both angelic and demonic powers, violating boundaries neither heaven nor hell would tolerate. Their arrogance united enemies that had seldom acted together. The destruction of Nineveh Novus came without warning in the year 1272. In a single night of unimaginable horror, the fury of heaven and hell descended upon the city with a vengeance surpassing the judgments once unleashed upon Sodom, Tyre, and Samaria. Fire rained from the skies while the earth itself erupted from below. For 72 relentless days, the city burned from both above and beneath, and when the devastation finally ended, almost every soul within had perished. Although its people were nearly exterminated, the city itself endured. Ancient warding spells woven deep into its foundations preserved much of its architecture, even as catastrophic earthquakes forced entire districts upward through the desert floor. Once buried libraries, vaults, and forgotten reliquaries emerged into the light, exposing fragments of the civilization's forbidden legacy. The horrors created within those hidden walls survived as well. Twisted creatures fashioned through unspeakable magical experiments now stalk the labyrinthine ruins, hunting through collapsed corridors in search of vengeance against the masters who had once tormented them. A handful of the scholars also remain alive, sustained unnaturally by the very powers that destroyed them, their minds shattered by the cataclysm. These immortal remnants wander the ruins as deranged husks, consumed by madness and haunted by the knowledge they once sought. Beyond the broken city, the desert itself remains cursed. The demons, once enslaved by the sorcerers, have become vengeful jinn that haunt the surrounding wastelands. Their terrible cries echo across the dunes, and those who hear their inhuman voices rarely live long enough to tell the tale. At the outermost reaches of the desolation stand the towering pillars of the sniper stylites of St. Simeon. Perched high above the cursed landscape, these holy sentinels maintain eternal vigil over Nineveh Novus. Their rifles are trained upon every visible approach, ready to slay anything attempting to escape the depths, while warning away the reckless souls foolish enough to seek entry into the accursed city. Even so, greed and forbidden curiosity continue to lure adventurers into the ruins. Treasure hunters, occultists, and seekers of ancient secrets occasionally succeed in slipping past the watchful stylites to descend into the shattered depths beneath the sands. Few are ever seen again. Those rare individuals who do not return emerge forever altered, carrying the unmistakable mark of whatever unspeakable horrors they witnessed beneath the buried city of Nineveh Novus.